record on this computer. Okay, welcome to the formal beginning of our class, Foundations of Politics. Today, we're discussing book 2 of Aristotle's Politics, book 2, chapter 8 specifically. Let me put on my PowerPoint. I cannot see. Oh no. Okay, book 2. Book 2, specifically book 2, chapter 8. For me, I have the blue book, and that's on page 42. The key theme is Hippodamus's proposal. Should we encourage progress in the laws? Should we encourage innovation in the laws? For most people in our modern world, answer is obviously yes. If the law is, simple or barbaric or backwards or just a little bit out of date, yes, of course we should update the laws. Aristotle has an interesting kind of like on one hand, on the other hand, arguments about Hippodamus's reform. I think it's really helpful for us to ask the same kind of questions Aristotle's asking when we are considering changing fundamental traditional laws. Fundamental and traditional laws. So today I am going to, with you, walk through book 2, chapter 8. I want to use the breakout room function on Zoom so we can discuss parts of Aristotle's arguments. Then I want to talk about the implications this has for us. So, Hippodamus, he's from this place called Miletus. It's in modern day Turkey. He is known perhaps best known outside of this one chapter. Best known outside of this one chapter as an urban planner. He designed the grid system of the Athenian Piraeus. You can see that picture there on the right. It's kind of like what we imagine it looked like based on the ruins that are there. Yeah, this is the grid system. This is, 5th Avenue and 21st Street in New York City. Hippodamus was the first to lay out a city, or at least an area, by a grid system. Aristotle, kind of comedically to me, takes a swipe at his dress. He's dressed in a rather overdone manner, always wearing hot clothes in the summertime in order to look good. And Hippodamus is the first not engaged in politics to give an account of the best regime. Towards the beginning of class, this semester, I mentioned my definition of politics. Or I think we might say Plato and Aristotle's definition of politics, which is the search for the best regime. Aristotle likes to add, especially Aristotle likes to add, in light of the particular. Politics is the search for the best regime in light of the particular. The regime, or the political community, in other words, that is most conducive to human flourishing, to living, to surviving, but also to living well, to flourishing. So Aristotle begins by praising Hippodamus for asking the right kinds of questions. It is good for Hippodamus to be searching to give an account of the best regime. But he does lack some experience. He's not engaged directly in politics. So here again, we see Aristotle's nuanced approach to the opinions of others or to commonly held opinions. He's somewhat charitable. It's good to give an account of the best regime. And yet, parts of Hippodamus's proposals will be off. So as Aristotle builds his own arguments on top of Hippodamus's, he's going to have to adjust. He's going to have to kind of refound the argument each time he goes through one of the proposals. So I'd like to talk about two of the reforms Hippodamus proposes. There are three, but we'll just talk about these two briefly. The division of the city. Hippodamus says the city should be limited to 10,000 men, and that those men should be divvied up into three different classes: artisans, farmers, and the military. And it's important to note that only the military has weapons. This will ensure order, harmony in the society. You know, everyone knows their place. Everyone knows his or her place. There's not a debate about who should rule. We can all just get along. And we have restricted the number of citizens so that it's not too diverse. It's not too pluralistic. We can maintain order here. Hippodamus would look at modern nation states and say, this is absurd to say that a political community of 325 million people just cannot claim the devotion of its citizens. What does it mean to be an American? Hippodamus would argue, I think. There are too many of you. It means so many different things to so many different people. The social unrest that we see as these different kinds of people get together, it's fluid. These things are going to cause social unrest. This kind of political community cannot survive. And so he wants to limit the number of people who can be citizens, limit the size of the regime, and also divide it neatly into these different groups. The second proposal, I've categorized this as rewarding progress. 1268a, approximately at 7 or 8, he also wanted to enact a law concerning those who discover something useful to the city, so that they might obtain honor. We want to honor those who discover something useful to the city. Innovators, inventors, discoverers, artists, playwrights. We want to encourage progress. We want to encourage advancement in all of these different areas of expertise. You might say this is a forerunner of patent law. The US Constitution, I find it to be really fascinating, especially when you dig into the details of what powers Congress actually does have. In Article 1, Section 8, Clause 8, the Constitution gives Congress the power to promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing for limited times to authors and inventors the exclusive right to their respective writings and discoveries. In other words, the United States Congress is authorized to encourage progress. How are we doing that? It's not exactly in this language, but by honoring those who discover something useful to the city, by making sure that they get to benefit from their invention. A patent or exclusive right to their invention, is a way of encouraging inventors to make their invention widespread, make it known. There's no reason to hide. No one's going to steal it from you. It's yours. You get the benefit of your invention. But through that discovery, we are going to benefit the rest of the political community. So patent laws are a way of encouraging inventors to make some money off their inventions, and in the hopes that they'll continue to invent good things for the community. So the community benefits when private property is protected in this sense. Yeah, like, do you want advancements in technology, science, medicine, then honor those who discover something useful to the city. Of course, the difference between these two examples, honoring and allowing people the exclusive rights to their inventions, is money. We might honor people who invent something, but what we really want is for their property to be secure. Same kind of idea, though. Aristotle critiques these two proposals. If the goal of dividing the city into three separate groups was to ensure order, stability, then Aristotle says this is not the way to do it. He says that farmers and the artisans will become the slaves of the military because the first two classes of people do not have weapons. Put the guns in there. Yeah, if you cannot defend yourself, then you essentially will become the slaves of those who can force you to do whatever they want. This is not going to create order, or if it does, it's going to create an unjust order where one group of people has all of the authority and the other two have none of the authority. And in cases like that, there will not be affection for the regime. Aristotle says this at 1268a25. The word is philikos, like Philadelphia, brotherly or friendly love. If you want to ensure that people, your citizens, love with a brotherly love the regime, the political community, the common good, then ensure that they have a role in governing. In APTAP 2 today, I was talking about the civil rights movement. It's no wonder people had to protest nonviolently, exposing the tension that was under the surface so that America could live up to her promise to protect the life, liberty, and property of its citizens. And it's no wonder that they didn't feel affection for their regime, for the regime that deprived them a part in deciding what happens in it. Do you want to create order? Because that was Hippodamus's original plan. Then make sure that each class is able to, one, defend itself, and second, shares in rule so that they have affection for the regime. Second, and let's spend the rest of our time here on his discussion of innovation. On the next page, so for me, this is page 44. I have the blue book, 1268b24. Towards the bottom of the page. Concerning the matter of those who discover something advantageous for the city, to legislate that they receive some honor is not safe, though it sounds appealing. It would involve harassments, and it might well happen changes of regime. But this leads into another problem and a different investigation, for some raise the question whether it is harmful or advantageous for cities to change traditional laws, if some other one should be better. So what about his proposal to honor those who discover something useful to the city? Aristotle has a on one hand, on the other hand approach to this. On one hand, it is not safe. It's dangerous. It's more specious than solid. You're taking a huge risk. But on the other hand, it sounds appealing, is the way our translator has it. It sounds appealing. I like that. Another way to say that is it appears beautiful to one eye, or it sounds beautiful to me. Changing traditional laws for the better. It sounds beautiful, at least to part of me. Like I can't stop stealing glances at it. Out of the periphery of my vision, I can see something beautiful over there, and with one eye, I'm glancing at it. So it's not safe, but it sounds beautiful to me, at least to part of me. I mean, the metaphor is it sounds beautiful to one of my eyes, which is a weird way of saying it, right? Our eyes don't perceive sound, but akuo is like acoustic. That's that word there, akusai. I perceive it, or it appears to me to be beautiful, at least in one of my eyes. So what does he mean? Should we change traditional laws? In traditional laws, there is the Greek patrius namus, the laws of our fathers, the ancestral laws. For the most part, Aristotle is talking about those long-standing, fundamental laws that help shape our way of life. It has implications for just, the law that the legislature passed recently. But what Aristotle is really talking about are those long-standing ancestral laws that our fathers and mothers, their fathers and mothers, their fathers and mothers abided by, that have really formed our way of life. So, should we change traditional laws? Let's see, we have 15 people here. Yeah, I'm going to break us up into separate groups. Before I do that, Crystal has a question. Crystal, what is your question?
Yeah, so when you're talking about these ancestral laws, words, are you implying only specifically laws that are written out, or could it also be construed as culturally accepted social conditions? Because there's a difference. Because from what I understand in the past, very rarely were laws actually written out. It was mainly culturally. So I'm kind of iffy there.
That's a great question. Thank you. We Americans insist that laws have to be written. Those
Okay.
British, they don't know their own laws because they're not written down. But that wasn't the case for basically every other. So you have the Code of Hammurabi. It's written down, but I mean, most of the people couldn't read it because they were illiterate. So namas could mean written or unwritten. It doesn't necessarily mean one or the other. It does mean, however, and this is a word we'll discuss a lot more later when we talk about Aquinas' treatise on law, promulgated, made known in a public and official way. I guess I can just Google the word promulgated and make sure I'm getting the exact right definition.
No, because when I hear that, I like, especially public way, I'm thinking about societal constructs that it's not law, but it's still not something that you would do.
Yeah.
Official proclamation. Okay.
Put a law or decree into effect by official proclamation. It doesn't have to be written. And one of the reasons that law does not have to be written, as in words on a page or something carved into a stone, is that according to Aquinas, and again, we're getting ahead of ourselves, we'll talk about this later, is natural law. Natural law is not actually written down with letters and words and spaces and punctuation anywhere. The divine law that's the Bible. Human law often is, you can look to Article 1, Section 8 of the US Constitution and see it. But the natural law the moral law, it's written on our hearts, but like you couldn't open up your heart physically and then like look and it's like, oh, here it is. I just have to like unravel it a little bit. It's not actually written on your heart. It's just impressed on your hearts or made known to your hearts. So this might be too much information, but basically the simple answer is laws do not have to be physically written down.
Okay, gotcha.
Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Cool. I'm going to pause the recording. Okay, so should we change traditional laws? I was able to pop in on a few and some fun things were happening. I want to start. Crystal, you were saying something interesting, but I couldn't catch it, and I think it'd be fun to talk about it.
Oh, okay. So I was talking. So the first thing that popped up in my mind when I was doing the reading was one traditional law that should be changed, in my belief, is in the country of Kyrgyzstan. One of their ancestral laws is bride kidnapping. So around 2/3 of the women there who are married have been kidnapped. It's to the point where police do nothing. In 1 year, one woman was reported as kidnapped. Whoa. Okay, there go the
Sorry.
screens. Okay.
I
So
can ask up, but
so just following like that's an ancestral tradition. An easy solution to that would be say, okay, abolish all marriages. However, that's not something that we should or could do, in my opinion. So it's recognizing where the old ancestral laws are going wrong or not necessarily meshing well with modern society and modifying it, not getting rid of it completely, because there is wisdom in things that have been passed down.
yeah, there is some wisdom in things that are being passed down, but some old laws seem barbaric, to use the term Aristotle uses. So that's his first reason. So now I'm going back to the PowerPoint. Sorry about that. Yes, on one hand, we totally should change some traditional laws. He says, for me, it's at the top of page 44, 12, 68b, 39, and 40. The laws of ancient times were overly simple and barbaric. It gives the example of Greeks. For the Greeks used to carry weapons and purchase their wives from one another. That is not exactly, as I understand it, what you're saying is happening in Kyrgyzstan, but it seems similar.
Yeah, I'm just I'm just highly opposed to that idea because it's something that's still happening today. A month ago, a young student, she was trained to be a doctor. She was kidnapped from the capital city. They specifically go after smart young women who are learning and trying to improve themselves because they'll be able to earn more money for the family later. So I have very strong views on that, as you can tell.
Yeah, well, I mean, it sounds like you should. It sounds unjust. It sounds like it's depriving a human being of, well, it's forcing her to do something that she doesn't want to be doing. So yeah, that sounds unjust. Um, Barbaric, you might say. Mark, if I don't mean to put you on the spot, but you said you were, if I understood you correctly, we're making the argument that we shouldn't, our standard should not be simply the traditional, but it should be rather something else.
Mm-hmm.
Would you mind explain? I couldn't catch all of it. Could you say it for the rest of us here?
Oh, so what I basically said was we should not give credit to the current law because of how old it is, but we should give credit to current laws based on our current goals as a society. So, over 100 years ago, one of our goals as a country was not to give women suffrage. But as that goal changed to allow women to have suffrage, so should our laws. But I think it's very important to make the distinction that we shouldn't just take all of our old laws and get rid of them. I think we should develop a new way of looking at laws based on what goals we have as a society. So we should use reason to dictate the goodness of a law, not just it's old or it needs to be new or something arbitrary like that.
Yeah, okay. And Aristotle says something very similar. So I switch now to back to the PowerPoint. Aristotle says, in general, all seek not the traditional, but the good. The reason that we would want to have a law is not simply because it's traditional, but because it's a good law. Probably most of us would say that we would want to make things better. Of course, we have different definitions of better, different opinions about how to get to better, but we are all seeking not the traditional necessarily, but the good. And typically, people who argue for the traditional argue that the traditional is good. So ultimately, what we're looking for is not the traditional, but rather the good. I'm gonna stop sharing. When I do those breakout rooms, I feel like I'm what's that song? He's climbing in your windows. He's snatching people. I feel like I'm doing that. Like, oh, I'm here now. Abby, you were talking about, if I understood you correctly from the brief moment that I heard you, that often what is traditional is time tested, which can signify that it's good. Do you want to say more about that?
Sure. Yeah, I think that a lot of old laws are built on, they're not just arbitrarily made, but they're built on people's experience. And sometimes we don't exactly have like a good like reason, so to speak, for like keeping a law. And like basically laws are more likely to be good if they've been time tested. It was my argument.
Time-tested laws are more often be good than not. Okay, yeah. I think I mentioned this. Well, this is Lincoln's definition of a true conservative, someone who sticks to the true and tried rather than the unproven and the untried. It's not that the traditional is always the best, but like it's a nice shortcut or it's a nice signifier for what is good. Mark asks, how long is enough time to test the law? And to reiterate Mark's point, or to state it in a different way, couldn't it also be true that the further away we move from that time, the less relevant that law is? So I'm sorry, I was gonna show a clip from Parks and Rec, but it won't let me show Netflix videos. So then I bought the episode. I spent an entire $1.99 on this episode, and I tried to play it, but it's just a blank screen because it's a purchased video, and so it won't let me show. So anyways, it's season 5, episode 19, article 2, or the second article, something like that. Anyways, TED Day. The town of Pawnee has a fundamental law, and in Article 2, it says that if ever the price of tea goes too high, that the citizens have the right to throw the tea into the river. However, the old-timey script makes the word tea look like the word Ted, and so every year they just throw a guy named Ted into the river, and he hates it. And he's saying, this is an outdated law. Plus, they didn't even mean that. They meant tea, not Ted. Leslie Knope, played by Amy Poehler, is sitting in her chair, and she goes, we're not going to change that law. And Ted, Theodore, he says there are plenty of laws in this town that are backwards. Like, you, as a woman, have spoken up against me, so I get to whack you in the head with an egg. Tom Haverford is an Indian man, and there's a law that says any white person can pay an Indian a quarter and take his property. And of course it means Native American Indian, but I don't know, you could probably interpret it that way. Laws can be misinterpreted. Laws can be outdated. Laws can be unjust. And so eventually Leslie Knope says, yeah, we totally need to change this law. And so if I can restate Mark's question, sure, time can test a law, but also time can show just how irrelevant a law is to modern circumstances. Sorry. So there's problems. There are problems with traditional law, at least some traditional laws. In addition, don't we update other things like medicine and gymnastics, the arts? If we change, like, if this wasn't really apparent last month, it is this month. We want the benefits of modern medicine. And for as much as we love, or at least many of us love the American founders, I mean, George Washington didn't have teeth, or he had wooden teeth, because medicine was so far behind where it is today. And so, we don't follow ancient Greek dentistry or early American dentistry. We update it for the present day. So we should change laws because they are out of date or barbaric. In addition, the law, so that's a problem with ancient laws, traditional laws, but there are also just problems with the law itself. The law speaks in universals. You should always give back what you owe. But life is more complicated than universals. There's particular cases that come up that the legislators could not have foreseen, that make the strict application of the law unjust. And so you would want to fill out the details, provide exemptions, provide exceptions for the law. And that requires changing the laws, sometimes even traditional laws. So Aristotle's first conclusion is some laws must be changed at some time. So progress. On the other hand, he says we should exercise much caution in changing these ancestral laws, these fundamental laws. So examples of this would be the United States Constitution, perhaps state constitution, maybe other laws that like really inform our way of life. Maybe it's a sort of law that your family has, a tradition that your family has. Maybe it's a tradition that your school, like King's, has. When you're changing those types of deeply felt laws, those traditions, those customs, you should exercise much caution. And this is because the force of law often depends on respect. Not always, right? The fear of punishments can act as a deterrent for future lawbreaking, for disobedience of the law. But for most of us aren't like going out to the grocery store, getting those 1 or 2 rolls of toilet paper, and then someone looks at you the wrong way and you're like, I need to kill that person. Shoot, but I can't kill that person because the law says I can't. I'm scared of the law. I'm scared of the punishment that the law will bring. So I'm not going to, that's the only thing that's really keeping me. I'm rationally, deliberately not flying off the handle because I'm scared of the punishment. No, for most of us, our society is ordered, there's peace, because in general, we respect the law. I don't want to say too much. This is like a half-baked hypothesis, but like I think this is one of the reasons that like traffic in American towns and even in American cities is not as crazy as it is where the law isn't as respected. So have you driven in, Mexico or Mumbai, India? It's nuts there. Part of the reason is there are a lot of cars there, a lot of rickshaws there. But the other reason is in America, I know that I have helped, or at least my parents have helped build these laws. We're governing ourselves. And so I respect the law. I have some affection for my political community. So I respect the law. So the force of the law, at least in part, depends on respect for reverence, on reverence for the law. Many times, people obey the law because they respect the law. And this happens most of all, I think, or it's possible that this happens most of all in democracies where the people have a say in what the law says. This respect depends on habit. And so Aristotle's second conclusion is that we can be habituated to revolution or to respect, to disorder or to order, to chaos or to peace. So I'm going to read what he writes here. 1269a 13, 14. Yet to those investigating it in another manner, this would seem to require much caution. For when the improvement is small, and since it is a bad thing to habituate people to the reckless dissolution of laws, it is evident that some errors, both of the legislators and of the rulers, should be let go. For the city will not be benefited as much from changing them as it will be harmed through being habituated to disobey the rulers. And the argument from the example of the arts is false. Change in an art is not like change in the law. For law has no strength with respect to obedience apart from habit. And this is not created except over a period of time. Hence, the easy alteration of existing laws in favor of new and different ones weakens the power of law itself. Do you see, then, how, according to Aristotle, the law is radically deficient? It must be updated to keep up with the times as we change our understanding of what justice requires of us, as we see new cases that, are not covered very well by this law. The law needs to be updated. And yet, the more we change the law, the less efficacious the law is, the less power, the less force the law has. So we can be, in other words, the more you change the law, the more you are habituated to changing the law. And so this is a dangerous thing to encourage because the law is the only thing keeping us from acting like beasts. Do you remember in book 1, Aristotle says that the greatest benefactor of all humankind was the first lawgiver, because the first lawgiver created order. We can be habituated to either order or chaos. Changing the law, especially changing the fundamental law for a minor benefit, is a bad idea because it habituates people. It undermines their reverence for the law. And the reason the law has force is we revere it. Mark argues, sorry, I'm taking a while to get back to this. I would argue that situation tests a law, not time. If a good law was made for a certain situation, that situation lasts a long time, then the law is good. Not because it lasts a long time, but because it fulfills its goal in that situation. The same law can be bad in the current situation and should be changed. Yes, I agree. And I think Aristotle sees your point and agrees with it. Aristotle always agrees, at least in part, to basically everything that's said, or that everything he summarizes. But there's a lot of truth here. the law can be written for one situation, and then a new situation arises where the application or the enforcement of that law might actually be unjust. So on one hand, the further away from that moment you get, the more likely a new situation has arisen. On the other hand, the further you get away from that, the further in time you move away from that original law, the more reverence for the law you have, which is a good thing because it maintains order. So the law, in this sense, is defective. Each option is less than ideal. Each option has dangers. But Aristotle says we should exercise caution. So what does that mean? Let's see, where am I at? Progress. Oh yes, or tradition. Yeah, I want to show it. I want to show the video. I was gonna just skip, but no, never skip the video. Come on. What are you thinking, Joe? I mean, what are you thinking, Dr. Griffith? So this is a clip, the first clip from the movie Fiddler on the Roof. Tevye is going to talk about what keeps their community stable. Here we go.
A fiddler on the roof. Sounds crazy, no? But here, in our little village of Anatevka, you might say every one of us is a fiddler on the roof, trying to scratch out a pleasant, simple tune without breaking his neck. It isn't easy. You may ask, why do we stay up there if it's so dangerous? Well, we stay because Anatevka is our home. And how do we keep our balance? That I can tell you in one word. Tradition!
Tradition, 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 tradition.
Because of our traditions, we've kept our balance for many, many years. Here in Anatevka, we have traditions for everything. How to sleep, how to eat, how to work, how to wear clothes. For instance, we always keep our heads covered and always wear a little prayer shawl. This shows our constant devotion to God. You may ask, how did this tradition get started? I'll tell you. I don't know. But it's a tradition. And because of our traditions, every one of us knows who he is and what God expects him to do.
It is the tradition, those ancestral ways of life that help the little village of Anatevka keep its balance. The metaphor is that they are like a fiddler on the roof. It's difficult up there. They're surrounded by, they're in a hostile environment. They have to scratch out a living. But what helps them keep their way, what helps them keep alive, literally survive as a community, it's tradition. So for example, they wear hats, a prayer shawl. The hilarious thing about that video, to me at least, is that Tevye asks, oh, you're wondering where these traditions come from. I will tell you, I don't know. I don't know. My mom told me this story. A mother and a child are making a turkey for Thanksgiving dinner. And the mother says, you should always cut off the sides of the turkey before you put it in the oven. You must always do that. It's very important that you do that. We've done that for years, generations even. This is something my mom told me. And the little girl's like, well, why? You know, like, in other words, we're seeking not the traditional, but the good. Why? And the mother says, I don't know. So the little girl asks the grandmother who's there, and she says, hey, why do we cut off the sides of the turkey before we put it in the oven? And the grandmother says, oh, the turkey wouldn't fit in the pan. Sometimes traditions, you just don't know why they're there, and they're kind of pointless. They were made, as Mark's point was earlier, they're made for a certain situation. That situation has changed. So how should we think about changing the laws? I think Aristotle is less interested in telling us what to think as he is interested in teaching us how to think about these questions. So when should we change traditional laws? Really like this quote from G.K. Chesterton. The whole world has divided itself into conservatives and progressives. The business of progressives is to go on making mistakes. The business of the conservatives is to prevent the mistakes from being corrected. That's funny. Chesterton also writes in that short piece we read for today about fences. So when should you change traditional laws? Don't change a traditional law until you know its original purpose. And you can determine, as Mark has helpfully suggested to us, you can determine its original purpose and whether or not it still applies. Do we still think that's a good purpose? Is this the best way to accomplish this? So Chesterton likens this to a fence. Let's say you buy a new piece of property out in the west somewhere, and there's a fence there, and it still works. It's still upright. It seems to still be functioning. Should you tear it down? Well, maybe, but you must first identify the original purpose of the fence, or the reason the fence is there. Maybe there is, I don't know, you can think of thousands of reasons why you might want a fence. You also think of 1,000 reasons why the fence is no longer necessary. But in order to determine that, you must first identify the reason we had the fence in the first place. Another piece of advice Aristotle gives here in Book 2, Chapter 8 is don't make big changes for small gains. Don't totally upend sacred traditions for a small benefit. Every time you change the law, you are slightly, or maybe more than slightly, undermining the respect people have for the law. So don't make big or frequent changes to the law if only small gains will come from it. Again, notice that Aristotle, he's not saying never change the law. He's saying some laws must be changed at some times. But notice that he wants us to pump the brakes. He wants us to stop and exercise much caution when we're changing these fundamental traditional laws. Briefly, let's talk about this Jefferson and Madison debate. Jefferson says that no society can make a perpetual constitution or even a perpetual law. The earth always belongs to the living generation. Every constitution, then, and every law naturally expires at the end of 19 years. If it be enforced longer, it is an act of force and not of rights. Jefferson wants rationality. He wants reason alone, only reason to rule. And so if you have to consent to the law, so you should completely redo the Constitution every generation. It's approximately 19 years, he figures out. Madison responds in saying, this would be chaos. It was difficult enough to get the Constitution agreed to by the 55, 56 men who met in Philadelphia that summer, and even more difficult to get 13 states to ratify it, or the people of 13 states to ratify it. But even more so, he says, frequent appeals would, in a great measure, deprive the government of that veneration which time bestows on everything, and without which, perhaps, the wisest and freest governments would not possess the requisite stability. Do you want a stable government? Do you want peace and order? Well, then don't invite revolution every 19 years. One, even if it works one time, fine, but it will habituate people to disorder. And no political community can survive that way. How does this apply to our lives today? Can you think of examples in America, maybe in your family, maybe as students at the King's College, where these types of questions might be helpful? Now, I'm not saying, hey, let's debate every controversial issue there is in the world, but I am saying, when would it be really helpful to ask these questions? Can you think of specific examples? Well, oh yeah, can I go back to the last slide for a second? Yes, I'll just do, sorry. Jefferson and Madison. Yeah, here you go. As always, these slides will be on Schoology, which I hope you can access sometime. Yeah, when people's lives are on the line, like the current healthcare system, maybe in cases of emergency, it's really important to depart from tradition temporarily in order to save lives. For a lot of the year, our small things, when you live in a small community, things feel really important. Like if something happens, because it just echoes. It comes back to you really easily. If you live, so like, someone has an argument in New York City, it's like, well, who cares? It happens all the time and doesn't affect me, and I have lots of space to go if I don't want to be a part of it. But in a small community like King's, if there's an argument and then everyone wants to get in because it's closer to home. What about the debate about house namesakes? I don't have an axe to grind, by the way, but I do think that these questions are helpful. Are some of our house namesakes outdated? Do they no longer fit with the mission of Kings? Do we know why we have these house namesakes in the first place? If we do know why we have these particular house namesakes, are they still aligned with our mission today? Would changing the house namesakes cause social unrest and disorder? And is the cost just greater than the benefits? On the other hand, is it unjust to have this namesake or that namesake for each house? Hey, again, I'm not saying one way or the other. What I am saying is Aristotle's argument here. This, on one hand, it's dangerous, so exercise caution. But on the other hand, sometimes some laws need to be changed. These questions, I think, can be helpful. Yeah, with your family, as you're celebrating Easter, if you're celebrating Easter or Passover or something like that, in these trying times that we hope are at least somewhat abnormal going forward. Yeah, what traditions should be changed? Is it a greater cost or is it greater benefits to change it? Just remember, whenever you change, you're taking a step back. So in order to justify change, you need to go like at least a step, maybe 2 steps, 3 steps forward in order to justify the change. Thank you. It's lovely seeing your faces.